In Battlefield, you can't really go wrong with equipping the good old trusty frag grenade. You throw it over at a guy cowering behind cover, and then that guy either gets blasted by a shockwave, or is forced to frantically dash out like a headless chicken to try and avoid getting blasted by said shockwave, letting you gun him down and send him back to the spawn screen. Unlucky for him. Just like that basic frag grenade, there's quite a lot of throwables in Battlefield that tend to get used quite a lot. Maybe because they offer a lot of explosive power, maybe because they're easy to use, or maybe because they might seem more practical for general play. With that said, there's also quite a lot of grenades and tactical devices in the games that don't quite get the same level of attention, even though they might actually be more useful in a certain situation, or whilst playing a certain game mode. It's these underrated, underused grenades and throwables that I'm going to be taking a look at today. Some of the ones that probably should be given a bit more of a chance, swapping that good old trusty frag grenade for something a little bit different, often something more tactical that might just help you out in a less obvious way, or even suit your role in the game slightly better. So without further ado, here's my top 6 underrated grenades and throwables in the Battlefield games. To start us off, we're heading over to Battlefield 5 with the anti-tank bundle grenade, something that first appeared in Battlefield 1 in the form of a gadget, but later came back as a throwable grenade instead. The gadget version from Battlefield 1 was a pretty common thing for a lot of assault players to equip on their loadouts, being a fairly effective short-range explosive to lob at tanks to harass them, and potentially blow them up if they're low on health. The AT bundle grenades pretty much have the exact same function in Battlefield 5 as well, only this time they take up one of your grenade slots instead, which I guess generally made them a less popular pick, with you now having to sacrifice one of your other grenade types in order to use it. There's quite a few different grenade options in Battlefield 5 that generally sound a bit more enticing, being much deadlier against infantry, rather than the occasional vehicle you might run into. So a lot of people tended to neglect the AT bundle grenades in favour for those instead. But as an assault player who's going to be more geared up for destroying those pesky tanks, this can be a really useful thing to have equipped, complementing your anti-vehicle gadgets really well too. Slap a few sticks of dynamite on the back of a tank, use the bundle grenade to detonate said dynamite by lobbing it into it, and hey presto, you've just done tons of damage to that tank, with the grenade and dynamite creating a much more violent explosion, and now you're in a much better position to finish that tank off. Might not seem like the most fun thing to have equipped, and it is generally going to be a bit rubbish against other soldiers, but the bundle grenade still definitely isn't a slouch, going really well with the dynamite and those other anti-vehicle gadgets in the assault class. Quite easily one of the most frustrating things to come up against in the Battlefield series is gas, which definitely created a lot of fuss in Battlefield 1, where gas grenades were used quite a lot in tight spaces and trenches. But Battlefield Hardline before it also sort of featured a similar type of grenade too, in the form of tear gas, which was still used by a few people but for some reason never really got the same kind of reception or featured on as many loadouts, often making the gas mask in that game a little bit useless. The funny thing is, the tear gas grenades in Battlefield Hardline are arguably even better than the ones we saw in Battlefield 1, which did a similar thing, blurring the screen, heightening suppression and causing gradual damage over time, but the Hardline version also doubled the damage towards anyone affected by it, making them a hell of a lot more effective. Lob one of these bad boys into an area with a bunch of enemy players, and they're soon going to know about it, putting them at a massive disadvantage. And unlike in Battlefield 1 where everyone had access to a gas mask, the only way to counter it in Hardline was to equip a special gadget, which most people don't do, because it takes up one of their gadget slots. It might not be the most uncommon grenade in the game, especially on smaller, congested maps like the Block, but considering tear gas is just so bloody effective and disruptive, it's quite surprising how many people choose to ignore it over the other options, without giving it much of a chance to shine. The next throwable in the list does require a bit more skill and judgment to do well with, but they can pretty much take down anyone close by almost instantly, giving them more power than pretty much all of the other throwables in the series. Of course, I'm talking about the throwing knives, which have appeared in Hardline and Battlefield 5, probably being more useful in Battlefield 5 with them feeling a bit more balanced and effective in that game. I suppose a lot of people don't want to sacrifice their grenades for something that's quite tricky to use, probably why a lot of recon players don't opt for throwing knives on their loadouts. But there's a perfectly good reason why they're exclusive to the recon class, and that's so they can compensate for your lack of close range power when you're using the longer range rifle. Basically meaning you won't need to keep relying on your sidearm all the time if another guy sneaks up on you, or if you need to deal with someone quickly in a close quarters situation. Definitely not a gimmick weapon, like a lot of people might think, being one of the most effective short range tools in the game to beat someone up close in a one-on-one fight. Sure, they can sometimes seem a little bit fiddly to use, and if you mistime your throw, that's usually going to cost you big time. But it's definitely a throwable worth equipping and perfecting, especially if you plan on doing a bit of sniping, often helping you out a lot more than the other typical choices on offer. When thinking about tactical grenades and throwables in FPS games, the flashbang tends to spring to mind quite a lot, being a thing that doesn't normally get kills, but instead lets you take down someone a lot easier with your normal gun, though it does still sometimes get kills, which is pretty hilarious. Battlefield 4 was the first time flashbangs came into the series' multiplayer, but generally seemed a little bit underwhelming in comparison to their counterparts in other games like Call of Duty. The range of effect was very limited, and they were only really effective if they landed right in front of your enemy's face, sometimes making them feel a little bit inconsistent and very situational. Because of this, they often got shrugged off in favour of one of the other, much deadlier grenades instead, designed to directly dish out the damage rather than give you a tactical edge. The fact that there were quite a lot of different grenades to pick from in Battlefield 4 didn't exactly go in the flashbang's favour either, so it was never really a very popular throwable, despite the fact that it had the power to temporarily turn your enemy's screen into the bloody sun. The flashbang is basically the ultimate anti-camper tool, designed to be chucked through windows and doorways to disorient and blind players sitting around in rooms and nestled in dark corners. It might not be super effective all the time, especially if you try and use one outdoors, but in the right situation they can be surprisingly useful for clearing buildings and passing through choke points, guarded by enemy players. Not to mention that they also do a pretty good job at detonating claymores too. Another grenade type that doesn't get used anywhere near as much as it probably should is of course smoke, which is something that's popped up in almost every Battlefield over the years, but still doesn't quite get the attention or credit it deserves, easily being one of the most tactical tools in the series. A couple of reasons for this could be down to how situational smoke grenades are, and the fact that they don't kill anyone or aren't particularly very interesting things to use. I guess they have become a little bit more useful in some of the newer games, especially Battlefields 1 and 5 with those operations and breakthrough game modes, because they do help to make it a lot easier for attackers to advance towards areas and block off lines of sight. With that said, they still probably don't get used anywhere near enough, even in those games, still being one of the least used grenades, despite the fact that they can be borderline overpowered on matches where a lot of people decide to use it together to push on through enemy lines. Although it might not seem it, smoke grenades have always been effective things to have equipped on pretty much all of the games, letting you pass through areas unseen, flank enemy objective points easier, prevent you from being spotted, and let you escape if you bite off more than you can chew. It's a great grenade to have when attacking control points or MCOM stations on rush, and it's a great grenade to have if a bunch of snipers decide to harass you while you're caught out in the open, being a grenade type with countless practical uses that can be really handy in loads of different situations, both aggressive and defensive. So probably my most underrated grenade in the Battlefield series has to be Battlefield 1's Impact Grenade, which might seem a little bit weak in comparison to other throwables, but is actually one of Battlefield 1's hidden gems. The reason why I put this thing so high on the list is because I'd honestly say that it's one of the best lethal grenades in the whole series, yet it's not a particularly very popular one, actually being one of the least used throwables in the game. All it is basically a bouncy grenade that detonates after impact, trading some of its power for speed. It might not seem very special, but if you've seen a lot of my old Battlefield 1 videos, you might notice that I tend to like using the impact grenades a hell of a lot. And that's because they're so bloody good at doing what they do best, inflicting small amounts of damage quickly to chip away an enemy's health bar, complementing your other weapons and gadgets really nicely. The impact grenade isn't designed to kill another player outright with full health, but it is designed to help, whether that be to finish someone off who's ran behind some cover, or whether that's to soften them up a bit first before engaging in a gunfight, giving you the upper hand. They're practical in pretty much any situation with any class, easily being one of the most effective grenades in the series, providing you play smart and use them to supplement your main weapons, rather than relying on it to do all the work for you. Ridiculously useful, ridiculously fun, and often a hell of a lot deadlier than the other grenades, giving your enemy barely any time to react or get away from them. So those are my top 6 underrated grenades and throwables in the Battlefield series, but do let me know which ones you think are the most underused and underrated down below in the comments. Do you use any of these grenades in this list? Let me know your thoughts about those too. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, have a good day, and I'll be seeing you in the next episode.